Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. Since the beginning of this year, at least 18 transgender people have been murdered in the United States. Their deaths, perhaps evidence of growing hate crime violence, and their names deserve to be said. So we will read them now. Dana Martin, Jazeline Ware, Ashanti Carmen, Claire Legato, Malaysia Booker, Michelle Tamika Washington, Paris Cameron, Chanel Lindsay, Chanel Scurlock.
Zoe Spears, Brooklyn Lindsay, Denali Berry Stuckey, Tracy Single, Kiki Fantroy, Jordan Kofer, Pebbles Ladime Doe, and Bailey Reeves. And the latest, B. Love Slater, a black transgender woman, just 23 years old, whose body was discovered in southern Florida nearly 2 weeks ago, burned beyond recognition. Authorities had to use dental records to identify her.
Joining us now is the National Press Secretary of the Human Rights Campaign, Sarah McBride. Sarah, thank you for joining us. It's a terrible topic to discuss, though. 18 deaths this year so far. According to HRC, advocates tracked at least 26 similar deaths of transgender people last year. I guess the way you think about this is due to fatal violence. The majority of these women, or the majority of these people who are killed, are black transgender women. How are we to think about this? Is there a correlation between these deaths?
Well, first off, thank you, Stephanie and Ali, for talking about this important topic. And thank you for beginning the segment by reading their names, because it reinforces that behind this conversation, behind the headlines, are real people who are worthy of dignity and respect, worthy of life and love. And this is reinforcing the fact that this is an urgent crisis. Over the last 5 years, we've tracked more than 150 transgender people killed in the United States, mostly transgender women of color. And while every year does differ in terms of the overall numbers, overall what we're seeing is a rising trend of hate-based and hate-influenced violence here in the United States, targeting marginalized communities writ large, and in particular the transgender community.
Is it officially being called a hate crime? We know that there is a rise across the board in hate crimes in the United States. Does this terrible tragedy or string of tragedies fall under that umbrella?
Some of these murders do qualify as statutory hate crimes, but in many cases, these crimes are hate influenced, which means that while hate may not be an explicit motivating factor, it's no less present in the circumstances that surround the crimes. When transgender people, particularly black transgender women, face discrimination in employment and housing, it pushes them out of stable employment, onto the streets, into underground economies, and out of society's traditional mechanisms for safety and security, putting them at greater risk of violence. And more broadly, we can't separate any of these murders from the societal context in which they exist. And when we have politicians and political leaders dehumanizing and diminishing the worth of the transgender people's lives through their rhetoric and their policies, it gives license for people to discriminate and in some cases attack transgender people.
So to the point that by reading their names, we are recognizing that there are real people. It's not this broad victimization of 18 people this year, 26 people last year. But it does come down to the idea that it is easier to erase or kill or burn or, in America's history, lynch people who you don't see as real, who don't fit into the same structures that are widely accepted in society. This is an extra burden for transgender people.
That's exactly right. When politicians are out there painting transgender people as predators, when people are out there painting transgender people as less than human, it gives license for people who may discriminate or may attack transgender people to embolden their actions. It lowers the bar at which fatal violence may occur. And we have to acknowledge that when someone lives at the intersection of transphobia, misogyny, and racism, it can have often fatal consequences, which is why we see the vast majority of victims are black transgender women.
So what can you do about that? I mean, when you look at this cross-section, you're saying that the majority of those who've been killed are black transgender women. We're aware of it. We're amplifying it. You are. We know the same thing from the American Medical Association. But what can you do in your position?
Well, there are a number of steps. One of the things we've been doing at the Human Rights Campaign over the last several years is trying to sound the alarm about this epidemic of violence, to make sure that the public and policymakers understand this for the crisis that it is. But more broadly, the new president of the Human Rights Campaign just recently went on a tour across the country, and he met, Alfonso David, our new president, he met with those who are impacted by this crisis the most, Black transgender women across this country. And what we heard was, one, the urgency of this crisis, and two, that we need action on all fronts to address this epidemic. That means making sure that in our communities, we're supporting programs that empower transgender people to find jobs and stable housing. It means more broadly combating the coarse and dehumanizing political rhetoric that we see around transgender people in our lives. And systemically, it means passing non-discrimination protections and other laws that uphold the dignity and protect the rights of transgender people around this country.
What does it mean to you personally?
It's incredibly difficult as a transgender person to wake up almost every day now to see the stories of discrimination and, in some cases, the stories of violence targeting our community. But my heart in particular goes out to the transgender people of color who have to wake up and see these stories, see these videos, see these heinous crimes that are occurring, and wondering whether they will be next. And that fear that so many transgender people, particularly Black transgender women, have to live through every single day, it should reinforce for all of us the urgency of this crisis and the need for change.
You know, on the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, I was interviewing somebody about the celebration of how far things have come for the LGBT community, and he said, not for transgender women of color. And if we kid ourselves into thinking that there's been remarkable progress for them, in fact, it might even be the other direction. There's a aura of hatred around. It's something people can't get their head around, and they choose to hate instead.
But Ali, we have to be aware, in places like New York City, we seem to think progress has been extraordinary because we're not cognizant of what it's been like culturally around the country.
Yeah, a lot of these women have died in places that are not New York City. Sarah, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the work you do. We appreciate it.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.